Welcome to Masterclass number 7. This topic today is all about how to get your permaculture design started. These are some of the 5 clear steps that I've really been working on for the last, 25 years since I've been designing and teaching permaculture. And people have talked to me in school gardens, in community gardens, or in their home design gardens, and in design courses too. And they were saying that they find it challenging to try and, bring together all the pieces of information and find how to get going, and sometimes getting stuck and feeling overwhelmed. So these steps that I want to share with you today are really some of the easy ways to find a way into the design process and how to really put yourself into that process really clearly. So let's get started. My name's Morag Gamble and I'm from the Permaculture Education Institute. Design is at the core of permaculture, and essentially in permaculture design we're looking at designing for life to facilitate sustainable living, more than that even though, regenerative living, ways that we can live that is restoring the earth, restoring the systems and creating abundance. Essentially permaculture is about a way of thinking too. It's thinking in systems. It's about thinking of how we can work with nature to cultivate living design processes rather than imposition and causing, destruction to a system. It's about how to nurture more life. And really the foundation of this design process is about listening to and reading the landscape. Now, this is something that traditional cultures and indigenous cultures were absolutely brilliant at doing, and it was core to how they worked. Actually, reading the landscape, it's like reading another language. And the more that you do it, the more that you practice it, the more that you tune in, the more that you immerse yourself in that environment, the more that you will be able to read that landscape. And another side of this too is that quite often, you think about the knowledge that must be embodied in traditional cultures and indigenous cultures. It's often not written down, mostly not written down. So when we're wanting to really think about how we can design with nature and design that's in tune with what's around us, it's not something that you can read in a book. It's actually something that you need to either go out and talk with people, or you need to go out and listen and observe. So this is core, the observation, the research, the learning. And the learning is not something, as I said, is necessarily done in the book. Quite often it is about working with someone else, trusting your intuition, about going and talking and watching and doing and being in that space. And of course, there is so much information out there that we can draw on, but not limit it to that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So essentially too, permaculture is about creating connections. It's not so much about, having this element and that element. Like I've got a compost heap and I've got a garden and I've got a this and I've got a that. It's actually how you create the connections between all those different things and how you facilitate a regenerative process so that your garden is improving the soil, so that your animals are woven into the process, and that you're cultivating abundance through this rather than feeding a system and putting more input in than what you're getting out. So actually the amount of work that you do and the amount of inputs that you bring in are creating so much more than what you put in. And essentially doing permaculture is about using your common sense. And I put uncommon sense there because quite often we find that we overlook often what's seen as possibly too simple a solution to actually address our needs. But it is many of these common sense, practical, not simplistic, but simple, elegantly simple solutions, which are very useful for addressing many of the issues that we're faced with today. So a friend of mine, Fritjof Capra, a mentor who I met back in 1992 at Schumacher College in England. Fritjof is the author of Systems View of Life, Tao of Physics, The Web of Life, The Turning Point. He's an author and physicist. And he also in this book, Hidden Connections, he wrote this: design is the shaping of flows and materials for human purposes. However, eco-design, and we can read in there permaculture design, is a process in which our human purposes are carefully meshed with the larger patterns and flows of the natural world. So this is essentially about actually trying to create, through design, an integrated system, and it's really putting us in the landscape rather than setting ourselves aside. It's about noticing how we're very much part of the natural world, and that design is facilitating that connection. So this process of design, and I call it a process, it's a circular process, an integrated process rather than a linear one. And this diagram here, that just a rough diagram that kind of describes how I see the permaculture design cycle. So it's always starting with the observation, reading the landscape, being in the place, noticing what's happening, noticing what's going on. And from there, to imagine what it is that we're wanting to create, to identify those sort of points of change that we can work on, and to start to think about, well, what are all the different possibilities? What's happening? What does the site need? What do the people need? What do the animals need? Investigate what's going on and evaluate that. And from that evaluation and dreaming and visioning, we can start to list some possible actions of what we might be able to do. Need to research those alternatives, of course, to find out where we can, what ones are appropriate, which ones we might need to work on a bit, which ones we might need to set aside. And after we have all that information, we can start to put together a bit of a plan and map out our design. And only then is when we start to implement. Quite often we want to jump straight in and get a garden happening, but really we need to go through this process first, because permaculture, as I said, is very much about design. So once we start to implement, we can start to observe again the impact of those changes that we're making, and reflect and review and maybe revise, most likely revise. And then it's this continual cycle of adaptation and change and action and research as we keep on moving our way to evolve our design. Now, of course, permaculture design is very much based on the ethics, the earth care, people care, future care, and the principles of permaculture design. And there's many things like the zones and the sectors and site analysis. And these are a lot of the things that we explore in the permaculture design course. We go in depth into all of the different design methodologies and design processes that enable us to create really cohesive permaculture designs. So I've got a course starting on June 25th, and it's an online course. It's together with the Permaculture Teachers course, and you can find more information about this on permacultureeducationinstitute.org. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what I wanted to mention about today was not so much all of these things. You can find the principles masterclass, which was masterclass number 5. I've got this up on my YouTube channel, which you can see down below, which is youtube.com Morag Gamble, Our Permaculture Life. And you'll be able to find that masterclass, but also masterclass 6 are still up on YouTube. I keep them up there for about a month, and then they go into the Our Permaculture Life membership community. To find out more about the Our Permaculture Life membership group, you can head on over to thegoodlifeschool.net, and here we have archived all the master classes, and there's interviews, and we're looking at designs and plant profiles, book reviews. It's really a permaculture mentorship program. So you can find that there, and for now you can find the masterclass number 5 about the principles online. So I encourage you to go and check that out. What I'd like to focus on today are the 5 steps that I see are ways of approaching your design, especially when you're getting started. They're ways to help you overcome the overwhelm. We always come to a design with a great deal of experience. Quite often people have said to me, but I'm just a beginner, I don't know anything about design. We have an enormous amount of experience and life lessons. We've been observing many things for a long time, and quite often it's about trusting also our intuition and finding the common sense. So really value what you already know already, and then also talk to others. And as I said before, really think too about how you can connect with the oral tradition and find people that you can really start to learn more and more from on your journey. And it's, as I've tried to indicate through this little diagram, it's not a linear process, and you may sort of cycle through many of these several times. But so firstly, one of the key things before you can do anything is finding your purpose and also finding your team. And what I mean by this is, if you can be really clear on what it is that you're wanting to create, then you're going to be far more likely to actually head off in the right direction. Number 2 is about finding your starting point. So there may be this big design that you're wanting to create, but where are you actually going to get started? Finding the flow is number 3, and that's actually how you're going to start to hang the whole thing together. Number 4 is about finding the heart of the design. And this is about how you can draw yourself into this space and really put yourself at the core of it. And number 5 is about how, after you've gone through this process and you've been doing lots of sketch designs and starting to get a concept, to actually go and design in situ, to feel it, to walk it, to map it. And then as we move on out from there, we continually evolve, experiment, and adapt our designs and continue this process as we go along to reevaluate our purpose and to, maybe bring more people into the team and find new starting points and adapt the flow and add richness to the heart and keep feeling and walking that design. So this process continues on, but I find that these are key nodes in our progress that can help us to unlock all that other information, the checklists, the processes, the techniques, the strategies, the implementation of the principles and the site analysis. But this is more about you, how you fit in the design and how you can be really feeling into being the driver of this and understand how it all works. So firstly, I want to just talk about each of these principles, each of these points one at a time. So firstly, the thing about finding your purpose and finding your team, it's important, I think, is to really draw down into what is your vision? What do you dream your garden to be? What are the ethics that you'd like to hold as you're developing your garden in terms of materials choice or design and development methodologies? And what's really the motivation behind you wanting to create this garden? Be clear about that. Write down these points and actually jot down some of the things that you think that this means for you. What are you trying to create? And it's not until you get this really clear that your design is really going to start to flourish and open and make sense. Quite often, we start to follow a pattern, but until we become clear on the purpose, we might miss actually what's most important for us. So for me, there's a couple of key things that I'm trying to show you here in these pictures that are really important for me as part of the purpose of my design. One is creating an amazing space for my children to grow up where they learn eco-literacy, where they're drawn into the garden to grow food, to harvest food, to play in the garden, for the garden to be their place of learning. I homeschooled my children for 3 years, and this was a central part of their classroom, so it was so important. Now, also, for me, it's a really important place for me to relax and to be, and I love to be surrounded by the colours and the scents and the flavours. But it's also a very important place for me in terms of my work and my livelihood. My work is being a permaculture designer and teacher, and permaculture education, I guess, is the core of pretty much everything I do. And my garden is the platform for a lot of that, whether that be for my online education work, but also for all the different groups that come into my garden, such as these high school students who come on immersion camps in permaculture, or it could be tour groups or adult education groups. There may be young children play groups that come in. All sorts of different people come into my garden and learn. So knowing that was a purpose of my design as an educational space, I designed it slightly differently perhaps than if it was only just for me and my family. And so understanding why it is really important. And also to know who your team is and make sure that you include them in this visioning and dreaming, and involve your children, involve your partner, involve your extended family, and think, put yourself in the shoes of other people who will be entering into your garden and get that clarity. So that's number 1. And until you've got that, it's really hard to move past this. So number 2, I find it's a really important thing to keep in mind always as well, is finding your starting point. What is the easiest place for you to start your garden? You might be faced with a big plot of land and you think, oh great, I'll get this whole area set up. But sometimes that can be overwhelming, and if you do too much at once, you can't keep up with it all. What is the easiest place for you to start? And often that's the closest, and it actually makes sense to make it close because it's there and it's right in front of you. You're noticing, you're gauging. As you're starting to evolve your design, you can start to see it rippling out from there. And I often suggest too that people use their starting point as the thing that's most important to you. So if it might be to have some fresh greens and salad greens, or maybe it's to have some herb teas, or perhaps it's medicinal greens, or possibly even flowers and edible flowers. Maybe it's about attracting, bees and butterflies into the garden, or maybe a craft material, or perhaps you're totally passionate about chickens and so you start with the chickens. What is the place that's easiest for you, that you're most passionate about, and that for you is the most important? So start small, but have that broad pattern in mind, and add detail as you go. And it's really okay to leave parts empty in your design. I've been in my garden here now for 20 years, and I still have several empty places. I know in my mind what's there. I can see it. I can see that, what will be there at a point, but I'm not ready to develop that yet. I'm still watching and thinking and evolving the design. And I know, I have a young family, and so in order for me to be able to have the time to manage all of that, it's not realistic. So I'm keeping my design purposefully small and close to me. And how I started that, I stood at the center. And I encourage you to do this too. Stand at the center of whether it be your home or the starting point of where your house meets your garden. It could be the kitchen door, it could be the kitchen window, it could be your balcony. And look from there and start to feel how you can actually find the best starting point as close as possible. Something that's got some nice sun and you can work from an edge so you can manage it. So find your purpose and find your starting point. First, two really important things to do. And number 3 is about finding the flow. Now, this is something when I go out and walk around people's gardens, I do walk about designs with people, and I really try and map this out first before we do any kind of zone planning or anything else. I start to think about, okay, so if you're wanting to move from your house to your studio, to your chickens, for example, or to your carport, how do you move through your landscape? And so you actually start to map out a movement flow, a pathway, and then you can start to hang things off that. So for example, for me here, I've left all the cars, any cars that visit our place stay right up the top. They don't come into our property, and so that's up the top. So if I want to go anywhere, and I walk out up this little pathway, up to the car up the top or the bike shed, and along the way, as I'm walking up, I can take my food scraps bucket and I can feed the chickens along the way, or I can pop it into the compost, and I can check how the garden's going, lift up a lid of a worm tower and see how that's going, and then maybe, send the kids off on the bus to head off somewhere, and then as on the way back down, I can collect the eggs and maybe grab some salad for lunch. And so there's this natural flow, and it's where I'm actually going normally. And it enables me to weave the garden in and around how I move in that space. And so rather than trying to force yourself to go in a way that's not natural, it ends up being kind of a fragmented feeling when you're out in the garden. And honestly, you end up not using particular places because it's just not comfortable to go there. So finding that flow, and of course, yes, it needs to be in conjunction with, the flows of wind and flows of water and all of those sorts of things. But this, I think, is what I'm trying to, this is not what you often don't find written in there, but actually how you are part of that flow as well, and how you flow through the garden. So make this the central pattern of your garden. It's kind of like, it could be the structure or the kind of the skeleton that everything hangs off, and then things ripple out from that point. So often I just get people to start walking around and seeing, maybe mapping out how they're moving through their site. Maybe you might even put some marking points as you're going around and start to feel that flow. Now, once you have a sense of, where your starting point is and how things flow, what are the things that are going to draw you into the garden? Now, it's very easy to get caught in, making a permaculture garden or an edible landscape, something that's quite functional and practical, which of course it has to be, and I'm not diminishing that in any way. But I really like to make it more than that. That it actually is a very central part of your life, your everyday life, your children's life, whoever it might be that's living in your space, that it's part of where you eat or play or relax or share information. It's something that enhances your life where you are, and it makes it easy to be there, and it draws you, and it's beautiful, and it's an easy flow for you to be part of this. So, and I call this the heart. Where are those points in your garden that are so important to you? What attracts you into that space? So, for example, for animals are always a really great one for that. The chickens in particular in my place are where people get drawn to so much. So that is certainly a point that I would call a heart of our garden. There's also things like the teepee trellis, which is a really important heart too, because it becomes a place that the children have, they've created as a different meanings each time. For it could be a fort, or it could be sometimes it's been a hospital, and just a cubby or a retreat little hideout. And at the moment it's completely covered in pumpkin vines, so it's it's an excellent spot when they're playing hide and seek out in the garden. But there's also other little spots that have nice little viewpoints where you can create little reading nooks, or little hidey holes where you can sit and relax and watch the bugs and pick the flowers and make things. Or perhaps it's a spot where you might set up some chairs and tables around maybe a cob oven or an outdoor barbecue, where you can enjoy being in the midst of your garden. Rather than just having the garden out there and your life is inside the house, this is what draws you out into garden, these really beautiful places within it. And so it's kind of like outdoor room, or a series of outdoor rooms, a series of nodes throughout the garden that really make it a very appealing place to be. So number 5 is, evolving from that placemaking, and this is actually really how to create that. So by putting yourself in the design, once you've got your flow and you've started to map out where you think things might be, I really encourage people to kind of draw it on the ground. And in some places this might be physically actually drawing it on the ground, like you could see on the left here. This is a project in Turkey, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Or you can simply see here, as we were mapping out some of our terraces and contour pathways, we did use some markings, and we used hoses, and we used all different sorts of things to map out how it felt, and we walked it and we shifted and changed until it got just right how we really felt we wanted it to be. So the idea of this, marking it on the ground, whether you use hoses or chalks or stakes or string, or you can even mow it, is to find out, how does it feel? Does the design fit? Where you're placing things? Does it work? Check it. It's all good drawing it on a plan, but when you actually place it on, it might work when you're looking at it like that, but when you actually put it on the landscape, oh, hang on a tick, that bit doesn't work. That doesn't quite feel right here. And you can shift and you can change it. So you find where those points of awkwardness are, or points of, like disharmony, or something you go, yes, this just feels really good. And so I really do encourage you to use that other sense, that sense of feeling, and that it's almost an intuitive feeling. Yes, when something feels right. So walk it and be in it. Take a chair around to different places and sit and feel it. Spend the time out there in that point of observation. So the observation is not just in the start before you act. The observation is continually all the time, and you use this to keep on evolving your design as you go. And there'll be changes all the time. Even once things start to grow, that might change how things feel, and then you'll be wanting to to continuously evolve and adapt. But I'll come back to this project in Turkey. Now, this was a really interesting project. It was working with a group of people who were recent migrants from rural areas mostly, who had been moved into these apartment buildings and were really craving a connection to the land. So the local neighbourhood centre and arts centre negotiated with the local council to find a piece of land adjacent to them. It was actually surrounded by some really quite ancient olive trees, but it was being used as a car park. So the council, happens quite a lot, said, okay, we'll give you a piece of land, and they cleared it and they fenced it. It would have been really lovely to have actually had a more open boundary that connected to the olives, and maybe not have cleared it completely. But anyway, this is the start, and it's surprising actually how often this type of thing happens when we start projects. But so what we did, we designed together in groups. We worked out all the different things that we wanted. We did that visioning process, the imagining. We worked out how we wanted to flow through the site and where the heart was. So they wanted to have an eating space and a shelter and a pond and shared composting things. And after a point, we realised that not until we actually got everyone on the side and mapped it out would we be able to finalise this design. So we got out there with some chalk and a can and put a hole in the bottom and walked around and just mapped out the design. And so then everyone together could start sort of altering that. They would, kick off some of the lines where it wasn't fitting and redraw it until all these so it was an allotment garden that had shared garden areas too. And once everyone got to the point of saying, yes, yep, this feels good, we're happy with this, and I'll take this plot and you take this plot, and everyone could agree because they could see it and they could feel it and they felt happy about it. That's when the design was started, and then people started improving the soil from that point. So I really value this idea of designing in situ and allowing people, whether it's people you're working with or your family or even yourself, just to spend that time to do this process. So it's interesting because a lot of people talk to me about, the sense of overwhelm and, angst or nervousness about trying to get started with a design. Or will I do it right? I don't know enough yet. So I really would like to help you release yourself from this design angst, and these are some points I wanted to just mention that might help with that. You don't actually need to know everything. You can never know everything. You can be doing this for a lifetime and still not know everything. You know what you know, and you can go and ask people, and you can go and, you can fast track your learning and free yourself from sort of the limitations of what it is that you know now by going and maybe woofing or volunteering in a community garden. You can read as many books as you can find, ask your neighbours, ask some gardening elders. Go out and do it and experiment and make mistakes. That's totally fine. Go and visit as many different gardens as you can see and check things out online. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I've created the YouTube, the channel with our permaculture life. So you can actually, I can share what I've got here and you can check it out and see what's going on. And I also invite you too to send in requests to, can you do a film about this or that? And this way you can start to learn something about what you're wanting to know about. So you never know everything. You know what you know now, so you can do the best with the knowledge that you have and just get started in a small and incremental way. And there's no absolute right or wrong either. There's so many different ways to do things depending on your soil, your climate, your aspect, your design aesthetic preference, the amount of people who are living there, the scale of your design. So, I can't sit here and tell you, okay, you need to do this, this, and this, and that will make you have a really excellent permaculture design. What I can do is share with you a whole set of principles and ethics and ideas and different strategies. But really, the way that you pull them together is right for where you are. So take your time and start small. There's no rush. It's not a competition of who has, the best garden set up, and it's okay to really allow it to evolve. The better that you can get a really small section working really well, rather than having a spread out garden that you're really not able to keep managed and it's constantly you're in a sense of stress and overwhelm about it. I would encourage you to do a little bit, feel comfortable, and then gradually add to it as you feel confident to do that. And that way you build up the experience and the knowledge, particularly in your, particular garden. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention too was that the plan is not the master. We have this idea, we'll create a master plan with our permaculture design and that will map out how everything goes. Yes, of course, it's really important to think through all the different processes, but don't allow the plan to be your master. It is just a point in time of the best thing that you know. And as you start to implement it, you might see where you need to maybe change it. So allow things to evolve. Don't get stuck on something being, the one and only thing. It's just an idea, really, the best idea that you had at that point in time. So the design is not an end. It's really a means to something greater. This is something that a lecturer, when I was doing my postgrad in landscape architecture down in Melbourne many years ago, said, and it was a light bulb moment. All this time while I was studying landscape architecture and environmental design, we're designing for a garden or designing for this or designing for that. And, it was just, that was the end, that, to get that assessment or to, make that garden look nice. But why? Why are we doing that? What is the purpose? And this is why I said that was the number one thing. The purpose of the design is something that is far greater than what it actually looks like there. And so, don't be stuck with the master plan and thinking, well, that's it. The design will evolve and so will you, and allow yourself to grow with it. And, change is a natural thing and an expected thing. And I really encourage people to allow this to be a living design process, something that does grow, does change, and you can change with it, and it can change you too. And so it's this, it's kind of like this shared growth process, you and your garden, in a really beautiful, connected way.